Good afternoon everybody, welcome to today's quick live where we're going to be editing a shot which you can also download as well. So look out in the description for this on Facebook and YouTube where you can download the file that we see on screen in a second and have a go with the techniques yourself as well. So without further ado, let's have a look at the shot we're going to edit. So this is what I was playing around with earlier, so if we turn on our before and after view you can see the difference. Nice simple edit, but it just goes to show what you can do with a few sliders and a little bit of local adjustments here and there as well. So we're going to improve the contrast, do something to the sky, take out some of the distractions like the boats as you can see, and do a little bit of color tweaks as well. Don't forget to throw any questions at myself as well, whether you're on Facebook and YouTube, and we try and pick up a few of those as we go along as well. So let's turn off before and after view. I've got an unedited variant here, so let's grab that. And then the first thing that's obvious to do is to grab our straighten cursor tool up here on the top of the toolbar so we can fix our horizon line. So let's just draw along the horizon. Fortunately it's nice and straight so it's easy to see, and once we let go, capture one will rotate around that point to make our shot nice and level. Excuse me. So now to just crop a little bit, I'm going to hit C on my keyboard, so that's going to switch to my crop tool, and then we're just going to pull this down to something like that and just hit enter to commit my crop. So I tend to like to fix a couple of those compositional things before editing, because I just find it distracting to try and edit if the right crop isn't in place. Personal preference, no reason why you have to do that first. If you want to kind of decide on your crop or composition later on, totally up to you as well. Okay, so next step for me is contrast, exposure, all those kinds of things. It's a little bit flat, and we can see that by looking at the histogram. We don't have much going on up here in the highlights. Exposure wise, I think I might brighten it a little bit, but I don't want any of the brighter tones to get brighter still, so I'm going to use brightness instead, which will just lift the mid-tones more as opposed to the entire tonal range. So we're just going to give those a little bit of a tweak, compared to if we did exposure it would kind of affect the whole range. So let's just give the brightness a bit of a bump, and then in our levels I'm going to hit auto, and then that will just drop the shadow and highlight points to either end. I might just tweak that out a tiny bit just to make sure we don't lose any sky detail. But we're going to bring that back anyway with a local adjustment in a second. Now contrast wise and clarity and so on, it's lots of nice detail and sharpness. So let's see if we can improve on that little a small amount. So I'm going to bring up clarity probably to somewhere around there, and that's just going to improve our contrast, but mostly in the mid-tones. Now we could add a bit of additional contrast too, but what I'm afraid of is that it would start to lose the detail in our sky and then like block up the shadows under the dive platform a little bit. So I'm just gonna, if anything, leave that very, very low. So if we just preview what we've done so far, I hit our before and after tool. So we've just essentially improved the contrast somewhat. It's just sharpened it up a little bit less haze, better detail, and so on. So next, I've been mostly editing for like the jetty and the sea to kind of get that looking right. I might bring down the highlights just a touch, and the whites, which is just those brighter areas, but there's still, the sky's got a bit more to give, if you know what I mean. So those clouds are quite dramatic. So what we can do is just use a gradient mask just to bring the sky back a little bit more, because we can improve on that. So what I'm going to do is grab my gradation cursor tool here, draw from the top. We can hold down shift to keep it nice and straight, and I want the fall off to kind of land just around the sea area or somewhere between the sea and the beach. So it's a bit too gradual at the moment. So what I'm going to do is hold down Alt and then change my fall off, so this makes it asymmetric if you like. So if we press M to see our mask, now we can kind of set the mask where we want, which is something around there like that. So that's given me a nice fall off which just kind of ends at the beach. So what we can do now is use a few tools to get the sky looking a bit punchier. So I might bring the exposure down, as you can see, and then bring up the clarity a bit further. Now to avoid the jetty getting a bit too dark, I might just bring up the blacks just a tiny bit, or maybe the shadows will have more effect. Yeah, just lift the shadows a little bit like so. Because you know, that jetty is like a darker area. If I was to bring the exposure down too much, then it's just gonna make that wood paneling very dark and it'll be a bit of a black lump in the center of the shot. So I want to make sure that we don't overcompensate on that. But the sky is looking much nicer now, I feel. The only thing I might do, because the sky is, it's maybe a little bit cool, we've got nice warm sand and warm beach, but the sky is quite cool. Now, as we've already got that gradation filter on the sky, what we could do with the color balance tool is we could do a couple of things. We could use the master wheel, which will just kind of put a tint in the entire layer, or we could decide if we want to split up the shadows, midtones and highlights. I'm going to try in the master just to push up towards the warmer tones, which will just take out a little bit of that coolness. I mean, if we exaggerated, that obviously looks bad. We could go in this direction, but that looks bad. But just a little tinge, looking at my RGB values, just to warm it up a little bit as well. Good timely question from Richard, actually. Could you erase part of a gradient mask? If I try to, I'll show you what happens. So I grab the erase brush. I'm on my, let's just name this sky. So if we've got our erase brush, I'll make it a bit bigger so you can see what's going on. If I start to erase, we get this warning message comes up that says, do you want to rasterize the mask? So without it being rasterized, it's parametric, which means it's kind of dynamic and we can change it at any time. So if I decide that I'd done a bad job of my gradient, I can always go back and tweak it. But if you wanted to erase a bit of it, Richard, which makes perfect sense, then you can do a couple of things. You can attempt to erase it and then say rasterize, or you can right click and then say rasterize, and that will lock the mask as it is, like so. Another thing you can do if you want to erase bits of it, let's turn on our grayscale mask. So this represents the mask in tones of grey. So white is the maximum mask, and as we fade to black, that's no masking. You can also put a Luma constraint on it. So if we hit Luma range, and then let's say we wanted to have everything except the jetty, we could probably do something like that. So that gives me my gradient, but doesn't it affect the jetty? So let's actually apply that. That might give us a better result anyway. So now my exposure range, or my, if you like, the gradation I did, is now nicely fitted around that jetty. So I'm glad you asked that question, Richard, because that's perfect. So that was a little bit quick about the Luma range, but there's a quick live a few weeks back now where we edited a shot from Sri Lanka which really goes into detail. But essentially Luma range you can plop on top of any mask. So if I go back into Luma range and say display mask, then you can see it in red, or if before we go in we say display grayscale, now you can see exactly where the mask is. So it's avoiding all those darker areas, which is pretty cool. And we can go back in at any point and tweak that range. So that's actually a good thing to add for this particular shot. Nice. Thank you again, Richard, for asking that. So we've deepened our sky down a little bit and we've warmed it up somewhat with the color balance tool. Don't know if I like it though. So kind of, I'll probably edit it in 5 different ways when we're doing that, but I'll kick a little bit of warmth in it, which is super nice. Okay, now we've got a few distracting things that we can get rid of as well. So I'm going to grab our healing brush. Let's zoom in a little bit. and we're going to take out some of these objects just to give us a cleaner landscape. Right click to bring up the brush parameters. Nothing fancy set here, just a reasonably soft brush, and then I'm going to draw around the boat in a relatively rough fashion, like so. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer, hang on. Oh, that's because we've got our gradient mask, that's why. So what I'm going to do is, because we've got the Luma range, I'm going to rasterize this mask to lock it in place, like so. So let's delete that heel layer and do that again. Should be all right this time. Let's see. Oh, that's an interesting little tweak which I hadn't seen before. I would expect that to get rid nicely. Let's try another one, like so. There we go. So it's probably just because it's sneaking into the Luma range. So let's get rid of that one. So I can select that and hit backspace, and then that will take that away. Let's get rid of this guy here. Notice how it lines up quite nicely with the sea line. And let's get rid of this one as well. That's good. And I think this island on the edge, let's take that one out as well. And now at this point, Capture One hasn't picked the best, if you like, source point. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move that up and then pick something around here like that. And we've got a similar issue with our luminosity range, like so. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take that sky layer out, and we're going to do that in a different way. So let's make a new layer, grab our gradient mask, do a similar thing, hold down Alt to make it asymmetric, and then now let's bring in our change to exposure once more, like so, and I have a little bit of extra clarity. Okay, now I'm going to return to my heel layer, and let's get rid of this boat as I did before. So we're going to just roughly mask around this guy, like so, and then let Capture One take that out. Nice. And we're going to leave our guys in because that gives us a nice perspective with what's going on, but also I'm going to clean up a couple of these spots as well. Now generally when you have a sort of pattern like a horizon line or something like that, Capture One does quite a good job of matching that. Now it's kind of picked up the other artifact here, so I'm just going to move this one and bring it up there. If you want to do like a fine movement of the source point, click on it once to select, and then we can use our cursor keys just to jog that a little bit, like so. So now I've picked a better source point for that particular area. So, and I think let's take out one of these as well, and that worked quite nicely. And let's see if there's any other spots. So we're not going to take our people out. What we're going to do, we've got like a little ghosty bit there of our original boat. So what I need to do is just extend my mask a little bit before. Now if I press M on the keyboard, you can see where the mask is and the areas that we took out. And what I should have done is extended that heel area a bit further down. Now a couple of things we could do here. We could either select this source point and just add to that mask, and that's probably going to be the best thing to do. So if I press M to hide the mask, and then now we've taken that out, or we could treat that as a separate object. So if I do Command Z to take that out, and now draw it in, Capture One might piggyback off that one, which it has done, or it might pick a different source point. So, but I think that works pretty good once we zoom out a bit. Let's take out. So we can always say undo as well and get back to that. And if you want to manually say, you know what, I don't want to use the existing mask, I want to make a new one, we can manually say, let's pick a source point over here by holding down Alt, clicking once, and now when we heal, you see with this arrow pops up, and then Capture One uses that source point like so. So it's up to you what you want to do in that respect, and then we just need to fill in that little bit there as well. There we go. So if we just zoom back out and hit our Y key for before and after. That's your shortcut for before and after. You can see what's going on here as we've taken the bits and pieces out. And I think that's pretty good. In actual fact, if we hit Y again, if we go back to our adjustment layer, this was our mask, which I redid because of the little interesting issue of the heel tool, which I have to have a look at. If I want to just lift this area up a bit, and in actual fact it's okay. I think the Luma mask was maybe overkill. But if I lift up the blacks, then that will just raise the shadows on that particular area. Or what we could do is just bring up the shadows a little touch as well, just to open up the shadows. And it probably won't affect the sky so much, as that's sitting more of a mid-tone. So if we play with the shadows, if I just push it up extreme or all the way down, you can see it's just kind of affecting that jetty area and the sky not so much. The blacks might just have a tiny effect on the darkest tones, but not much. Okay, let's have a look at a question. Good sort of non-related question from Peter. Can you get an email reminder when we're doing this live? If you look on the events page on Facebook, I can see you're a Facebook user, Peter, as you're commenting on Facebook. If you look on the event section of Capture One Pro, then you can look at the events coming up and then ask to be reminded, and you'll get a notification as well. So always check that. Let's see. Jeff says, thanks for showing something that didn't work as expected. Yeah, so it's definitely a curious one for me, and I'm going to have a little look closer at that as well. And I don't have an explanation right now, otherwise I'd tell you. But in actual fact, our edit has worked, so it's all good. But if it's something that needs to be improved on, then we can fix it. So that's super simple to do. It doesn't matter which order the layers go in, so that wouldn't make a change in that respect. So it's just probably an enhancement or a change that we can do. But it's all cool at the end of the day because we found a way around it. Now the only thing I might do is grab over here, let's just take this lump out as well. Now on the heel layer you've got ultimate or unlimited numbers of heel points to go from. So it doesn't matter how many times you do this. I'm just going to select that once and use my cursor keys just to jiggle that down a tiny bit as well. So just so it's better, and click once to deselect it. If those arrows become bothersome to you, right click and you can say hide arrows. Or essentially if you just mouse off the viewer, then they disappear anyway. Cool, right, let's zoom out and take a look-see and have a look at some questions. Okay, let's see. If you have anything to ask, please don't hesitate. Lara says, why are people still using Lightroom? Just a thought. Well, in fairness to anyone using Lightroom, obviously you get comfortable with a certain kind of workflow. That's totally fair. There's no bad RAW converters out there. Obviously, I happen to think Capture One does the best job with the tools at hand. But if you are set into workflow, it is difficult to change. But hopefully sessions like this can help you feel more comfortable with going to a completely different application and seeing what it can do as well. So if you're new to Capture One, don't be afraid to try stuff out. You can't break images. You can't mess up any existing library that you've got with another application. So just, give it a try. But yes, good question, Lars. I don't know why either. Let's see. In the brush settings, what should keep low, opacity or flow, or just as flow as it's used in Photoshop? Well, if you want like the full-on technical explanation of opacity, flow, size, hardness, our ambassador Paul Reefer has a really good video on his YouTube channel of a very in-depth instruction of those. When you're healing, flow generally tends to be all the way up to the max. Let's just make a new layer at the moment. Flow really is the rate at which the mask builds up, I guess, is the way to think about it. So if you want to gradually brush in an adjustment that you've made, then keeping the flow nice and low tends to make the adjustment more believable and more natural looking and so on. So it's the difference between having a really dry paintbrush, say in this example with a low flow, or a really wet paintbrush, which would be all the way at the top. So if you imagine painting a wall, it's exactly the same analogy. And then opacity is really essentially how much, or what is the maximum that you want to hit. So at 100%, if we had exposure at +2 or whatever, you would, with a mask of, or an opacity at 100%, you would reach that point, 2.39 stops. But if we are only at 50, then we would only ever get to half that adjustment. Flow is just simply the rate at which it builds up, as I said before. Does the image need a bit of distortion correction? Let's see. Let's check the lens correction first of all. So we're up at Canon 24, it's at 100%. Let's grab a guide. So we're going to add a horizontal guide, and let's just grab our cursor here and drop this on the horizon. If anything, it's slightly wonky, so if I go to rotation and just use my cursor key just to jog it slightly, I'd say that's pretty good. So it's dead flat, so I don't think I'd change anything on the distortion. Let's just hide our guides at the moment. So if we put distortion down to 0 and then compared to 100, let's hit enter, then it does fix it to some extent. Once again, let's look at 0, like so. It's actually an interesting distortion. It goes up a little bit at the edges. So what about 80%? Also works. So distortion, I think, is good. Perspective, if anything, Sebastian, who shot it, might be looking down a tiny bit, but you could potentially go this way if you wanted to. But it's probably not something I would have thought to do, but maybe it doesn't hurt. Again, personal preference. Let's see, just looking at the last couple of questions, and then we're pretty much done for this session. So David, I'm not sure. So PJ says, can you change the layer order? It's not necessary. Doesn't matter which order the layers go in, as it's all non-destructive, so not really an issue. Let's see, Meister, is C1 just as good when editing film scans? Little trick for film scans: if it's a negative, what you have to do is on your levels tool, let's just duplicate this variant, let's clone it so we don't mess this one up. You have to grab the black and grab the white and switch them like that, and then you get the negative. So if you have negatives, color or black and white, flip your levels like so, and then you'll get the ability to play with your film scans. But it does work really, really nicely, but some of the adjustments will then be reversed, which is a bit screwy with your head for a while. So you'll find exposure works in reverse and a few other bits as well. But it works perfectly nicely. Let's see, a couple of people chiming in about flow. Sharon's got a good description. Yeah, flow is the rate of the build-up up to the opacity level. Perfect. So 5% up to 50%. That's a very simple way to describe it. Perfect. Let's see. Krishna Kumar says, if you reduce the exposure in a mask and add another mask to lighten a part of it, like the jetty, does CO use the original jetty in the image and apply the effective adjustment, or progressively darken? Well, neither really, because it's an additive process. So let's say if layer 1 had -0.5 and layer 2 had +1, then the result on top would be +0.5. So just imagine doing the sums as you go up and down the layer stack. So it's just really that additive process, and non-destructive, of course, as well. Let's see. C1 works great with negatives. That's good, Jim. And Paul Reifer, that was the name I was mentioning. So June was asking, so that's how you spell it. But yeah, it's a really good in-depth tutorial on flow, opacity, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I think looking at the various questions, we are probably good for the moment. Oh, that's a nice message from Bart. Changed from Lightroom since a week and very happy with Capture One Pro for Fuji. So thanks to you, Bart. Last little look at the shot. So if you remember, let's turn on before and after. This is how we started. like so. So still a nice shot, but just obviously a little bit lacking in contrast and depth. Easy to fix with just a few sliders. We didn't do anything really super complicated with exposure and high dynamic range, just optimizing that. Auto on our levels to bring back some contrast, a little gradation in the sky to get that a bit more moody, and then finally with our heel layer, if we just turn this off, with our heel layer, just cleaning up some of the bits and pieces in the background like so, just to make it look a bit cleaner as well. But again, all personal preference if you want to take them out or leave them back in. So there we go. Thanks for joining us again today. I'm going to have one last look at the questions and check. Good one from Chai Meng actually. Any way to alter the grass color? Definitely. Just going to my background layer. We'll finish up with this. A couple of things we can do. We could use our basic color editor. So we could grab the clicker, or pointer rather, click on the color you want to edit, and then as you start moving, then Capture One will just move those sliders around. So if we wanted to make it a little bit darker, we could just bring that down like so, just to make it a bit moodier. Or if you prefer, if we go to the advanced color editor and choose, then you have the ability to do a lot more control in terms of adjusting the saturation range as well as the color range. So those are your two choices for editing colors. Okay, thanks for joining us today. I hope that was a useful little edit. Don't forget, if you want to download this raw file and have a go yourself, then you can do so. It's in the description of this video. So please go download, have a go, and don't forget to share your edits using Edit With Us on Instagram or on our Facebook group as well. So there's a link just gone up in the comments for our Facebook group, Capture One Creative Lab. Creative Lab. Do join that up and post your edits in there as well. Once again, thanks for joining, and hope to see you again soon in the rest of the week. If you're keen to learn from a master, on Thursday we've got a webinar with Joe McNally, so that's going to go out live here as well on Facebook and YouTube. So check the events page as well for times in your area, and come back and watch Joe run through some edits with me as well. Take care everybody, enjoy the rest of your day, and see you soon. Bye now.